Hello and welcome to the Gold Newsletter channel. My name is Kai Hoffmann, I'm the @JR Mining Guy on Twitter, and together with Brien Lundin, I'm the host of the Gold Newsletter channel, and we're here in Florida at the Rules Symposium, and I'm joined by Sean Wade. He's the president and CEO over at Power Metal Resources, and I'm really looking forward to this introduction because you're an AIM-listed company. We don't talk to many of them, so I'm really curious to learn more. Sean, thanks so much for joining me here.
Thank you very much, Kai. It's great to be here and great to talk about Power Metal.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to diving a little deeper, but before we get into the nitty-gritty and some of the details, give us a 30-60 second overview of the company. Please.
Well, Power Metal, as you said, is AIM listed, so London listed, London Stock Exchange listed. We describe ourselves as a project incubator model. Our business is mining exploration and development. Rick Rule, who obviously is the shareholder, that's hence why we're here, describes us as a kind of mining merchant bank. And it's a model where he has been very successful in the past, and I think that's what has attracted him to a Power Metal. So what does that mean exactly? It means that we take early stage exploration assets, we add value to them through methodical, low-cost exploration techniques. That can mean geophysics, geochemistry, exploration drilling, obviously. We seek to move those assets up the value curve, ultimately to make commercial discoveries. And then we look to crystallize that value created through some kind of corporate finance processes, whether that's an IPO spin-out, a joint venture with a separate investor, or an outright sale, depending on what the right outcome is for our shareholders, is how we would seek to monetize that. So we're not, in other words, a regular sort of conventional exploration company who's looking to take an asset from exploration through development into production necessarily. One way to think about us is maybe a little similar to perhaps a private equity fund, but where we are active an active investor and an explorer, so we're adding value to those assets.
No, fantastic. Really good overview. You know, we'll dive a lot deeper. I have a lot of follow-up questions, of course, for you, Sean. But run us a bit through the track record first, I think, to understand and how the model works and maybe some of the potential exits.
Yeah, so that's a great question, because when we came here this time last year, we had some, obviously, projects that we had already spun out, but we're here again this year with a lot more to talk about, with a lot more of those crystallization events having taken place. So I think maybe running through it all would take us a long time. So let me just highlight a great example. We have a business that we IPO'd in May last year, which is called Brien Metal Resources. It's recently changed its name from Golden Metal Resources, so people will see that. We IPO'd that business 8.5 pence. It's now trading around 33 pence. We own roughly half the stock still, so we went from we started it with 100%. We went down to just over 50, and as a consequence of dilution and so on, we're just below 50%, and that's about half our value, well, more than half our value, in fact. So our stake in that business is roughly about 17 million sterling. My market cap is about 20, so it's very substantial value for us.
Way more than 50%.
Yeah. So yeah. What I meant was, we're 50% of it. So it's that's been a very successful transaction for us, and obviously we're a very, very happy shareholder. So that's a good example of the model in action. Another example is a deal we're hoping to complete very shortly, which is for our uranium assets in Canada. We have about 1,000 square kilometers of license area in and around the Athabasca Basin, which I'm sure your listeners will be very familiar with. And we are, at the moment, about to enter into a joint venture with a major strategic resource investor who's going to take 70% of that business in return for injecting £10 million of capital for exploration into that business. So essentially, that values our stake in that business, or that values our business on day one, before any discovery is made, at £10 million, which is compared to roughly about £1 million we've invested in it. So that again shows, we've added some value there through exploration, through some early stage work. It's got it to a point where we can attract this big investor and realize a very large valuation uplift for our shareholders.
So Sean, as a prospect generator or incubators, how do you finance yourself? I've seen so many prospect generators sort of run into cash flow issues because they can't generate enough capital or management fees even to cover G&A. How does that look for you?
That's a really great question, because we've had a couple of years tough market conditions. Okay, so typically companies like us would look to raise capital in the equity market by issuing stock, and often maybe with some warrants as well. But it's difficult to keep going down that road, particularly in tough markets, because it means dilution for shareholders And when they're having to wait a while for the returns to come through, that can be quite a frustrating process for investors. So we try as much as we can to avoid going to the equity market if we can. I mean, we did a fairly big raise in, I think it was May last year, which is what Brick Rule came into. And we've raised a little bit of money since, but we're trying to kind of minimize the amount of dilution that our shareholders suffer. So really, the other main option is to realize cash from our investments. And we did that last year with our stake in Kavango Resources. We realized about £500,000 worth of stock. We sold those for cash. And I think I'm not going to guide investors necessarily to specifically which projects we're going to look to monetize, but clearly, if you have this asset generator model and those assets appreciate in value, that's going to be your source of cash going forward. So it's important that we recycle the capital that we make, and we don't do that just simply by diluting. So we have an asset set right across the piece, but also the other point is that the individual businesses have their own capital base. So, for example, First Development Resources, which we're doing an IPO spin out in Australia, that's raising money for itself right at the moment. That's not coming from us, the parent. That's coming from the market. Power Arabia, which is our efforts in Saudi Arabia and Oman, we're doing a pre-IPO financing at the moment, and that's going to be quite big. I mean, that could be £15 million plus. So the individual businesses will go and raise their own capital, which obviously I do for them, but less at the Power Metal company level.
Okay. Sean, on the capital structure real quick before we dive deeper into some of the projects, I want to learn more about Saudi Arabia, for example, but to catch us up on the capital structure and what is your burn and how much are you investing, or what is your budget this year?
So in terms of capital structure, we're listed on AIM, as I mentioned, but we also have the US OTC listing as well, which is really important because when we were here last year, people were really excited about the story, very, very interested in the model, but a lot of investors here find it a bit difficult to invest on AIM, through their app or whatever. So we've taken on the US OTC listing since then, and it's been really, really welcomed here. So a number of investors have said that they are buying shares already, which is great for them, this week. It's going to take a while to drive volume, really onto that, but it's going to be a major part of our capital structure is going to be hopefully having some North American investors through this conference and others, and obviously through the good offices of people like you appealing to investors over here, I think is going to help a lot. Now, in terms of the sort of cash in the business, we don't tend to talk about it a lot in outside of our reporting periods because it does fluctuate. Inevitably, at some periods we've got quite a lot of cash on the balance sheet, and obviously sometimes we're deploying it and therefore it looks low. So we try not to really sort of discuss in a lot of detail because it can be a misleading point, at various times. When you have an exploration business, I find myself at certain points I'm writing very large checks, and then for periods of time, cash is coming in. So we have our reporting periods. We just reported our interim results a few weeks ago, and our year end is end of September, and those will be reported in April next year. But when we think about budgets, that is very much on a kind of case-by-case basis. But the really important point here is that we have lots of hungry mouths to feed across the business, and it's very important that these companies stand on their own 2 feet, have their own exploration plans, their own budgets. We've just put in place, for example, the budget for our Athabasca portfolio, and that's obviously being provided by the investor that's coming into the JV. Likewise, First Development, they have their own budget. So we're the kind of overseer of all of this. But if you think about the PLC company, the parent, there's like 8 of us in a relatively small office. So that in itself is not a kind of big budget business. The money is spent at the asset level. No.
Run me a bit, how does it look like distribution of funds to shareholders? Like when you have a divestiture, for example, like you mentioned the gold company that you own 50% of. Like how do shareholders benefit from that?
So I think it's really in terms of the asset value. I mean, we have said that, over time, clearly it would be our goal to distribute dividends in specie, for example, or cash dividends, or maybe share buyback, whatever. That will be at a later stage in the company's development. The way that we would project the story at the moment is to say, okay, look, Guardian Metal is 33 million of market cap. We have 50% of it. That's 17 million of value versus our own market cap of 20 million. the market will catch up with that valuation, and that valuation gap will close. So, how will shareholders expect to make a return? The answer is through a rising share price as the market overall catches on to the valuation disconnect.
Run me a bit through the geological model and maybe the expertise of the team as well, because you mentioned you got projects in Saudi Arabia, projects in the Athabasca Basin which are uranium focused. How do you manage to cover all those different geologies?
Now that's a really, really great question, and I'm really pleased to be able to answer that because it allows me to highlight the skill sets that we've got in the company. So we have 4 senior geologists working for us who between them have, I'd say, over 70 years of experience in exploration geology, and that's across really pretty much every continent, every commodity. So we have a specific expert in uranium, which has obviously been very important for the Athabasca projects. But Bill Brady-Good, who's our technical director, sits on our board. He oversees the geologist. He's an SRK veteran. He's been a CEO himself, and he's an explorationist, right down to his fingertips. So this gives us the opportunity to, when projects come in that are interesting to us, we're able to assess very, very quickly whether or not they're going to be projects that we can add value to, and it's through the experience of that team that we're able to do that. So that's really, really important.
Okay. Do you have a specific resource focus? It seems like I wouldn't say it's all over the place. It is focused based on the expertise of your geologist, obviously, but is there a certain focus?
We're very much focused really on the critical metals for energy transition. You'll hear a lot of people say that here, and that's also very much our model. So you think about uranium, copper, nickel, rare earths, PGMs, etc. We also have good exposure to gold, but really it's about that critical metal transition. Now, the other one to highlight is tungsten, which is less of a transition metal, but it's obviously very focused on the defense industry. Now, the US government obviously, knows that it's a critical metal for defense, but they don't want to be dependent on Russia and China for the supply of that. So they want to build that capacity here in the US, and Brien Metal Resources has its flagship asset is a major tungsten resource in Nevada. So that kind of macro overlay as well is part of what's driven our investment in that. Now, the uranium similar. It's a critical metal for energy transition. There's a demand shock coming, or not coming. It is coming. It is happening from AI and crypto and so on. A demand for a lot of power that has to obviously be cleanly produced. That means nuclear. That means uranium. So that's what's driven the price from $20 a pound up to roughly about $100 a pound, and that's why we staked out those properties when the price was low, sort of 2 or 3 years ago.
What are the holding costs of all the projects you have? How many projects do you have, and what are the holding costs? Let me ask this way.
That varies enormously, by asset. Where you have, license area, obviously you have to keep the licenses in good standing. So a certain amount of exploration expenditure is necessary. We've got, I think we've got 11 different projects. It kind of moves in and out a little bit. But we have different levels of ownership within those. So it's not something I can give a straight answer to, I'm afraid, but each project area or each subsidiary company has its own exploration plan, which will in itself have those different those distinct fundamentals.
Gotcha. One thing with Project Incubator, you explore your own projects. The question is how much are you willing to invest per project? I'm sure that's on a case-by-case basis. It's a bit different, but how far do you want to take it? Because once you've made a discovery, the question is anybody interested? And the price valuations, where do you want to sort of send it off to the next partner? That
is a very good question and right at the heart of the model. I'm really glad you asked that because it does vary case by case, and it obviously depends how big the project is. And an example of that is our Malopo Farms nickel project in Botswana in Africa. Now, that is potentially a globally significant nickel deposit, a district scale as it's called. But in order to prove that and make the discovery sufficiently commercial, if you like, to be able to say now this is a district scale asset, costs a lot of money and is a huge amount of work. Now, we've undertaken several drill programs there where we've identified a feeder zone, a mineralized system. We recently announced a drill result which had intersected a sharply dipping conductor, which furthered our understanding. There is a disconnect between what with any mining company, what you think you've done and what, say, a major is going to want to see done in order to invest. And closing that gap is really the where the secret sauce, the real value add. So you have to look at how much am I prepared to invest in that? What am I going to get from that? How much understanding am I going to be able to achieve in that? But of course, exploration is difficult. It's uncertain. And it requires, a lot of capital in order to get there. So that's why the uranium business is going to generate so much value, because we have an investor who's prepared to invest a huge amount of capital and to make those discoveries. If I go to my shareholders and say, look, I think we can get a really great discovery here at Malopo, but it's going to cost, I don't know, I'm picking a random number, $5 million. Are you prepared to write that check and do that, given a market cap of, say, 20 million? And, the answer may well be no. So therefore, we have to look for alternative structures where, we maybe have a JV partner who's going to do it, whatever. And that's really the heart of the model and the work that I do.
No, interesting. Really good concept. I appreciate that. Run us a bit through the news flow for the next 3 to 6 months. What does it look like? You mentioned, developments first development down in Australia, the IPO or pre-IPO financing. Maybe summarize it a bit for us.
No. So that's again good question. So one of the great things about having a big project set is that we generate a lot of news. So when we get investors interested, we can keep them interested by regularly updating them on the project. So what are people expecting to hear? First Development Resources IPO, as you said, we hope that's going to be Q3, Q4 maybe, but we're certainly expecting that to happen this year. We've got the completion of the uranium joint venture. That's pretty imminent. I'm hoping that's going to be no more than a matter of weeks away, and that's going to be a big value generator. The Power Arabia, there's two elements there. One is the financing that we talked about. The other is actual project work, and we've already announced one field program completed with a joint venture that we already have in place in the west of Saudi Arabia, focusing mainly on lithium, but also a little bit of copper. We are hoping to sign another major agreement in Saudi Arabia soon, which is going to with what will be a very well-known mining company where there's fantastic exploration potential, and that's also going to generate a lot of news and a lot of value. So I think Arabian Shield, Athabasca Basin, and the FDR assets in Australia are going to be the three big news flow generators in the immediate term.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about the Arabian Nubian Shield here, so I'm really curious what you're doing there. One of the areas I look very closely at.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's probably the most exciting new geography for exploration in the world, and I'm sure you've been discussing that with a lot of other people. What has Saudi Arabia got? It's got this fantastic geology. Okay, so there's historically, when you think about Saudi mining, it's been focused on gold and aluminium and industrial minerals, phosphates, etc., principally. But now what people are talking about is this opportunity in lithium, in copper, in potentially rare earths, and lots of other these critical elements. The Saudi Vision 2030 is their impetus towards creating a fully functioning mining sector to offset the dependence on oil and gas. And the Saudis are very, very serious about doing this, as they are about everything they do. Because they have this great experience in oil and gas and attracting international investors, everything is already set up. The ministries are extremely helpful. The contacts we've made there have been absolutely fantastic. We're already up and running in the country, and we're expecting to do more likewise also in Oman. But the geological opportunity is absolutely huge. I mean, the conditions are tough, and the geologists will tell you that doing field work in 50 degrees is tough, and I don't envy them one bit. But the opportunity to create a lot of value is there. And for us, it's two things. It's applying for licenses in our own right, but it's also working in joint venture with existing license holders.
I was going to say, do you have a partner in Saudi Arabia? I think that is vital to get any work done, and also maybe get some funding out of Saudi Arabia.
Yes, I mean, both of those things. So we're looking at an asset by asset basis with partners on each specific asset. So the deal we've already done with EV Metals is our partner for that project. The partner we're going to hopefully sign up for very soon is a different entity. But I would say that there are already more than a dozen potential partners that we can work with or we can go into the country and do that exploration work. In terms of investors, there is also significant interest from Saudi investors to work with us, to joint venture with us, and to help fund that business, and we're actively working on that right now. So I think the opportunity there, and it's going to be a big focus for us, and it's going to be ultimately a big IPO spin out, is huge.
No, fantastic. You're operating in some really exciting areas. And Sean, I appreciate you stopping by here at the booth and our little podcast studio. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
Everybody else, thank you so much for tuning into the Gold Newsletter. I hope go check out Power Metal Resources. Really interesting. Really curious about the Arabian Nubian Shield. That's personally my favorite area. But go check it out. What is your favorite area? And let us know. Let us know in the comments down below. Leave a comment, leave a like, of course, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with lots more here from the World Symposium in Boca Raton, Florida. Thank you.